The chamber of the Galactic Council gleamed with a cold, crystalline light. Each delegate's seat was shaped to the body of their species. Tall, spindled perches for the Avori, deep water-filled spheres for the Calanth, and a single curved platform for the human observer's absent seat. In the center, the speaker's dais floated on magnetic fields, slowly rotating so that no one could claim favoritism by position. The speaker's voice was calm but carried an undeniable weight. The matter of Earth's development is before us. Intelligence reports confirm their rapid expansion in technology, culture, and interlinked networks over the last 2 centuries. We must decide our course. Holoscreens lit the air with images. Satellites orbiting a blue and green sphere, ocean-going vessels, vast cities glowing in the night. More screens displayed graphs that showed a steep, unsettling curve, Earth's capacity for invention climbing faster than almost any known civilization in Council history. Delegate Freon of the Torvex Alliance shifted uneasily in their chair, their translucent head fronds twitching. They have achieved nuclear fission, rudimentary space travel, and advanced computational algorithms in the span of a few short generations. This is unnatural. Delegate Murek of the Seville Dominion, a broad-shouldered figure with bronze, skin plates, leaned forward. It is not unnatural, it is dangerous. They do not expand with the permission of others, they expand because they will it. Every analysis we have conducted indicates that once they break the boundary of their home system, their influence will grow uncontrollably. A low murmur passed through the chamber. Some delegates agreed instantly. Others shifted in silent thought. From the shadows at the far end, a softer voice joined the debate. Perhaps they could be brought into the council as partners, suggested Velara of the Gelnar, whose species valued diplomacy above force. We have done so with other young civilizations. Murek's reply was sharp. And how many of those partners overthrew our guidance within a century? Earth will do the same, but faster. They will refuse any structure they did not design themselves. The speaker allowed the words to settle like dust. The proposal before us is simple. Preemptive integration of Earth into the Council's system of governance. This will ensure that their growth aligns with the stability of the galaxy. Integration, Freon repeated, the word curling like smoke. An invasion, then. You dress it in diplomacy, but we all know what it means. Our fleets descend, we disable their defenses, and they join whether they wish to or not. Several delegates nodded, though not in agreement, some with approval, others with unease. Delegate Sarvin of the Kethri Confederacy tapped a talon against their console. Let us not pretend Earth is defenseless. Their planetary defenses may be crude, but they are numerous. Their species does not think in centuries or even decades. They think in hours. They will react swiftly. That is precisely why the operation must be decisive, Murek said, voice firm. Shock, overwhelm, establish control before they can respond. The speaker raised one long, delicate hand, and silence returned to the chamber. The matter is clear. This vote will decide the course of our history with Earth. One by one, the delegates cast their votes. The voting hall filled with soft tones as each choice registered. Green for agreement, blue for abstention, red for refusal. The tall crystal pillars lining the chamber shifted colors, showing the will of the council. When the final tone sounded, the results hovered in the air for all to see. 55 for integration, 4 against, 3 abstaining. The speakers. Voice was calm, but something in it suggested finality. The resolution passes. Preparations will begin at once. Earth will be brought into the council's fold. In that moment, history took a turn that none of them could reverse. The delegates congratulated each other, exchanging calculated smiles and careful words. Yet, in the quiet corners of the chamber, a few exchanged glances, heavy with unease. Far away, orbiting its warm yellow sun, Earth turned beneath clouds and wind, unaware that distant minds had just decided its fate. Somewhere, an engineer was, sketching a design that would change the course of her country's future. A teacher was telling a classroom full of students that no one could know what tomorrow might bring. And in a small coastal town, a boy was staring at the night sky, wondering if anyone out there was looking back. They were. The fleet arrived without warning. At first, the ships appeared as faint glimmers against the darkness, small distortions in the starlight. Then they grew, resolving into vast silver shapes, their hulls covered in patterns that shifted like deep water. The largest vessel alone was longer than some of Earth's cities, its surface bristling with antenna arrays and gravity projectors. In orbit, the Council fleet deployed with mechanical precision. 200 ships formed an arc across the sky, each settling into position as if following an invisible grid. High above Earth, the blue and white sphere spun beneath them, its continents edged in gold by the light of the rising sun. Every major telescope on Earth caught sight of them within minutes. Amateur astronomers flooded forums with shaky images, the objects growing larger with each passing frame. News outlets scrambled to confirm what governments already knew. This was not a meteor shower, not a satellite malfunction, and not a drill. In Washington, Moscow, Beijing, New Delhi, and countless other capitals, leaders held hurried calls in secure rooms. Military commanders traced the incoming positions and realized quickly that the fleet was already past Earth's defensive edge. The orbital paths were precise, deliberate, and impossible to intercept with existing systems. Then the first transmission arrived. It was not a booming voice across the skies. It was a signal routed directly into the communication networks of every government, military, and scientific agency. The voice was calm, measured, and translated seamlessly into every language. People of Earth, the Galactic Council greets you. Your civilization has reached a point of advancement that requires guidance for the stability of the galaxy. We offer you peaceful integration into our structure. You will retain your culture and people, under our supervision. This is not a request. No demand for resources, no threats of destruction, yet the tone left no doubt. It was an order wrapped in formality. On the streets of London, a crowd gathered in front of giant screens showing the translated message. Some stood silent in shock, others laughed nervously, filming it on their phones. In Lagos, a group of university students began an impromptu debate, shouting over one another about whether the message was a bluff. In rural Canada, a farmer turned off his radio mid-broadcast and went back to fixing his tractor, muttering that he had work to do before the rain came. Inside a high-tech lab in Tokyo, a robotics engineer leaned over her desk, already sketching, an idea that had just sparked in her mind. If their drones are here, we can intercept their signals, she murmured to herself. She didn't know that thousands of others across the planet were thinking the same way in their own fields. Scientists, hobbyists, hackers, and soldiers alike. The fleet's ships stayed in orbit, motionless but watchful. Smaller craft detached and took positions closer to the atmosphere, each one a perfect mirror-smooth oval reflecting sunlight. They didn't fire. They didn't land. They simply waited. In the United Nations chamber, the emergency assembly convened. Delegates from every nation spoke in tense voices. Some argued for immediate surrender, citing the impossibility of resisting such an overwhelming force. Others insisted that no terms be accepted without negotiation. A few argued that the message itself was a declaration of intent, proof that Earth still had a choice, however slim. Across the oceans, military forces quietly activated defense systems. Submarines shifted positions beneath the waves. Air bases loaded aging missile systems onto their launch rails. Engineers began stripping older satellites for parts, searching for any advantage. But beyond the official plans, something else was happening, something the Council had not predicted. People were talking. In homes, cafes, online forums, and hidden message boards, ideas spread faster than any official briefing. Not orders, not strategies, just possibilities. What if they weren't invincible? What if their technology could be disrupted? What if Earth didn't need to match them in strength, only in creativity? High above, in the flagship's command center, Council Admiral Theron observed the planet through a curved viewport. The human cities sparkled in the night like constellations scattered across the ground. To him, it was beautiful, in the way a wild animal was beautiful, impressive, but ultimately to be tamed. "They are not prepared," said his tactical officer. Theron allowed himself a small, certain smile. "They will learn." He turned away, from the view unaware that somewhere below, in countless small ways, Earth was already preparing to teach the Council a lesson it would never forget. The Council's fleet had waited long enough. From the flagship, Admiral Theron authorized the first stage of integration, a series of precision strikes designed to disable Earth's electrical grids, communication hubs, and military command centers. The goal was not destruction, but paralysis. In every campaign before, this tactic had brought resistance to its knees before it could even begin. High above the northern hemisphere, 3 frigates rotated into attack formation. Their hulls shifted, opening panels that revealed smooth, disc-like emitters. These were designed to overload power networks without leaving a single scar on the landscape. Energy, not fire, would break this planet's will, but Earth was already moving. In an old airfield in Poland, a group of engineers worked in the shadow of a Cold War-era hangar. Spread out before them were drones, thousands of them, some bought from hobby shops, others scavenged from warehouses. They had been reprogrammed in just under 2 days, each loaded with small payloads and fitted with new guidance systems. Many would not make it far. They didn't have to. When the first Council attack signal pulsed across the ionosphere, the drones launched like a cloud of metal hornets. On military radar, they appeared as thousands of fast-moving points, confusing, automated targeting systems. The frigates tried to adjust, but the swarm kept coming, weaving unpredictably, some sacrificing themselves to crash into sensor arrays and comm relays. In Houston, engineers at a private aerospace company redirected a decommissioned weather satellite, turning it into a makeshift jammer. The signal was crude, but the moment it activated, one frigate's targeting grid flickered, throwing off its precise timing. The Council had never seen such disorganized precision. In the Mediterranean, a small fleet of patrol boats moved into position under the cover of a local fishing convoy. When the second frigate descended toward its target range, missile locks pinged from an angle its shields didn't cover. The frigate's commander dismissed the threat, until one missile detonated a few meters away, not to damage the hull, but to scatter metallic chaff directly into the ship's ventilation systems. Inside the frigate, alarms blared as environmental filters clogged. The crew was unharmed, but visibility dropped, controls jammed, and the ship began to drift off course. Meanwhile, in a quiet research lab in Chile, a group of physicists fed a loop of mathematical noise into the public internet, knowing full. While the Council's surveillance AI was scanning human networks, the AI slowed as it tried to process the endless, shifting sequence, diverting precious computing power away from the fleet's targeting systems. Admiral Theron's confident expression began to harden into something colder. "They are improvising," his tactical officer reported. "Against this?" Theron gestured to the glowing fleet status display. "Improvisation will not save them." But improvisation was exactly what had begun to chip at the perfect symmetry of his operation. The third frigate's strike on an Asian power hub failed entirely when local engineers rerouted their grids manually, shutting down entire sectors before the overload could take effect. Instead of collapsing the region's infrastructure, the attempt left the city dark but intact. Lights off, but resistance burning brighter than ever. On Earth's surface, the news spread in minutes. Social feeds carried shaky footage of drones harassing alien craft, ships drifting off course, and cities remaining unbroken despite the attacks. The effect on morale was immediate. People began sharing tactics, instructions, and wild ideas. Some were useless, but others were brilliant, born from the collective imagination of millions of minds refusing to be silent. The Council's original plan had allowed for 2 hours of concentrated strikes before complete planetary submission. 2 hours came and went. The grid still functioned in most regions. Communication channels, despite jamming, found ways to reconnect through old radio frequencies, printed flyers, and even hand-delivered messages. From orbit, the view of Earth hadn't changed much, but in the minds of the fleet's commanders, the planet's profile had shifted from passive to active threat. In the flagship's dim war room, Admiral Theron stared at the tactical map, now dotted with anomalies he could not easily explain. The humans had no central command that he could pinpoint, no predictable hierarchy. Every counterattack seemed to spring from somewhere different, with no obvious coordination. Yet somehow, they were interfering with his operation at every step. "This is irregular," his tactical officer admitted quietly. "It is disorder," Theron replied, though there was less conviction in his voice now. He had faced disorder before, but never disorder that worked. Far below, in a small coastal town, a man checked the makeshift comms relay he had built out of scavenged electronics. A single light blinked green. He smiled. Somewhere, someone else would see that light and know the fight wasn't over. The Council's ships remained in orbit, but something had changed. Their first coordinated strike had not broken Earth's defenses. Instead, the planet had responded with a kind of resistance that was difficult to quantify, quick, scattered, and strangely effective. Now, in the command centers of the fleet, the tone was more cautious. Admiral Theron leaned over a tactical display, scanning data that refused to make sense. "They fight without a pattern," he said quietly. "Every other world has given us something predictable to dismantle. They give us noise." The noise was about to get much louder. In a cramped apartment in Sao Paulo, 3 university students sat shoulder to shoulder in front of their computers. They were not military, not engineers, and had never met anyone in government. But they had something the Council did not expect, a direct line into the alien fleet's data relay. It started with an intercepted signal meant for one of the smaller observation craft. The students didn't try to destroy it. Instead, they altered it, inserting a simple image, a photograph of Earth from orbit, overlaid with the words, "We are not yours." When the altered signal bounced back through the fleet, it didn't just show up on tactical screens, it also reached civilian channels across the galaxy that the Council used for propaganda broadcasts. Billions of non-human eyes saw Earth's message within hours. In Mumbai, a group of radio enthusiasts cracked the Council's low-frequency communications, adding layers of unexpected sound. They embedded faint human voices speaking dozens of languages, each telling a fragment of a story, some real, some invented, about humanity's history of resisting control. To alien ears, the effect was disorienting, almost hypnotic. Within the Council fleet, confusion began to spread. Ships received contradictory orders. Officers reported hearing background whispers in their comms channels. Some junior crews were unsettled enough to request temporary communication blackouts, and still, the flow of messages continued. In Berlin, an artist collective began posting stylized images of the Council's fleet on every major social platform, reimagined not as terrifying invaders, but as awkward, oversized relics from a bygone era. The designs went viral. Memes reached the point where even people in remote areas with no direct access to news began to hear distorted, humorous versions of events. It wasn't just humor, it was strategy. The council had always relied on fear as the first step to compliance. Now fear was being replaced by mockery, and mockery was something their rigid hierarchy had no defense against. Meanwhile, the messages reaching the council's own core worlds began to take a more personal turn. Hackers from Seoul, Nairobi, and Toronto worked together to infiltrate non-military council databases, finding details about individual officers, family histories, personal interests, even recorded speeches. They wove these details into the YACI, intercepted broadcasts, speaking directly to the officers in ways that made it feel as if the humans knew them personally. One frigate commander froze mid-order when his screen displayed an image of a painting only his daughter on his homeworld would have known. No threat accompanied it, just the painting and the words, "Go home." The council called it psychological contamination. On Earth, it was simply called talking back. By the third day of this campaign, Admiral Theron's command center felt different. Officers spoke more quietly. Technicians double-checked every transmission, wary of hidden messages. The efficiency of the fleet's coordination began to slip, not from lack of resources but from hesitation. Every order now carried. The question, was it truly from the Council's high command or was it another human trick? From a safe house deep in the mountains of Colorado, a retired linguistics professor coordinated a network of volunteers to keep the information stream going. They switched from hacking to pure broadcast, using whatever frequency could cut through the Council's jamming. In short, looping bursts, they sent out Earth's music, classical symphonies, folk songs, street performances, anything that carried human emotion in sound. When those signals reached alien ears, they were unlike any transmission the Council had catalogued. The melodies didn't follow strict rules, the rhythms shifted unpredictably, and yet they stirred feelings that lingered long after the sound stopped. The Council had planned for physical resistance. They had planned for political stubbornness, but they had not planned for a planet that would fight with ideas, laughter, memories, and music. In the flagship's observation deck, Admiral Theron stood alone, watching Earth rotate below. The tactical charts still said the fleet was in control. Yet in some unspoken way, he knew the battle had shifted, and for the first time he wondered if control was slipping through his hands. In the Council's long history of military campaigns, there had always been patterns. A target world would resist at first, small uprisings, sporadic attacks, but eventually its defenses would settle into predictable rhythms. The Council would map those rhythms, dismantle them piece by piece, and the conquest would be complete. But Earth was refusing to follow the script. Admiral Theron paced the length of the flagship's strategy deck, scanning reports that read like fragments of an unfinished puzzle. Every engagement told a different story. There were no repeating tactics, no common points to exploit. The humans were not simply defending. They were bending the shape of the conflict in ways the Council had never faced. One report stood out. In a coastal town along the northern Atlantic, Council forces had landed expecting token resistance. Their mission was to secure a small port, to use as a supply transfer point. At first, the locals seemed cooperative, offering no resistance, even allowing the landing craft to roll up the shore without interference. But once the crews disembarked, the trap closed. Heavy steel cables, hidden underwater and weighted with old ship anchors, snapped upward in unison, pulled by winches mounted on fishing boats. The cables locked around the landing craft's stabilizers, holding them fast. Before the crews could react, more cables dropped from overhead cranes along the docks, and old trawler nets covered in chains tangled the ship's aerials. The entire landing zone became a prison of metal and rope. The Council craft were intact, but stuck. The locals walked away with intact alien vehicles, and not a single shot had been fired. Far inland, in a farming valley, another pattern breaking. Defense took shape. The council had sent automated drones to monitor crop fields and rural roads, expecting no trouble. The drones returned hours later, covered in a strange, sticky material that clogged their vents and sensors. The culprit turned out to be a mix of agricultural resin and pollen launched from modified irrigation systems. The council recovered their equipment, but it took days to clean and recalibrate. Even the council's airborne patrols were running into unexpected hazards. In the skies above Central Asia, a formation of small fighters broke off their route when swarms of brightly colored balloons began drifting upward. Some were harmless distractions, but others carried fine metallic threads that tangled in engines. The sight of alien fighters weaving awkwardly between clouds of children's balloons was captured on hundreds of cameras and spread worldwide within hours. To the council, these incidents seemed random. To the humans, they were deliberate, designed to waste time, force repairs, and create the impression that the invaders could be mocked and harassed without consequence. What unsettled the council even more was how quickly these tactics were spreading. A method used in one town would appear in another country within days, adjusted and improved. The council's analysts could not find a central command structure to target. It was as if the entire planet was learning collectively, without ever speaking to each other directly. Inside a converted warehouse in Cape Town, a small team studied intercepted council movement logs. With a mix of satellite images and ground reports, they found gaps in the aliens' patrol schedules, tiny windows of opportunity measured in minutes. Those gaps became the basis for small, sharp strikes against supply lines. The attacks didn't aim to destroy entire convoys, they aimed to make them unreliable. Fuel shipments vanished, sensor equipment was stolen, navigation markers were swapped, or removed entirely. By the third week of the invasion, the council had lost more equipment to capture, sabotage, and mysterious malfunctions than in any other campaign of the past century. It wasn't a crushing defeat, but it was eroding the fleet's confidence in ways that no energy weapon could. On the flagship, Theron stared at a new report showing that one of his supply depots, securely guarded on a small island, was now missing an entire section of its outer wall. The humans hadn't blown it apart. They had dismantled it piece by piece, stealing the materials without triggering a single alarm. "This is not a war," he said to his second-in-command, his voice tight. "It's a storm, and we are inside it." Below, on the planet's surface, another group of civilians began sketching out their next move. They didn't know what the people in the coastal town or the farming valley had done, but it didn't matter. Somewhere, someone else was already breaking another of the council's rules. By the end of the fourth week, the council fleet still held orbit, but the tone in its command halls had shifted from confident inevitability to a tense, watchful caution. The humans had not just resisted, they had made the fleet look clumsy. Equipment failures, delayed operations, and constant harassment had slowed the invasion to a crawl, and then came the first coordinated strike. It began with a signal sent from a remote mountain station in the Andes, an old military facility long since abandoned, reactivated by a team of engineers, technicians, and former pilots. The signal wasn't an attack. It was a carefully timed burst of navigational data sent into low orbit, bouncing between a chain of repurposed satellites. The message reached every human defense group that had the right equipment to hear it. The plan, codenamed Operation Glass, Fang, was risky. It called for simultaneous actions across the planet, on land, at sea, and in orbit, designed to force the Council into making rapid, uncoordinated movements. The first step was a diversion. In the skies above the Pacific, several obsolete rockets launched within minutes of each other, each carrying nothing more than reflective debris. From orbit, the sudden bursts of heat and light looked like weapons launches, drawing two Council destroyers into evasive maneuvers. At the same time, an array of ground-based transmitters lit up across Eurasia, flooding the Council's communication. Spectrum with chaotic bursts of data, fragments of human languages, encrypted military chatter, even pieces of music. The fleet's targeting and navigation systems began filtering the noise, but the mix of patterns and unpredictability slowed the process to a crawl. The real strike came from above. In low Earth orbit, a cluster of civilian satellites had been quietly repositioned over the past week. To the Council, they were harmless. Communications and weather systems, outdated and poorly shielded. But engineers on the ground had modified them to deliver a different kind of payload. Streams of complex, recursive data designed to exploit vulnerabilities in the fleet's software. When the satellites transmitted, the effect was immediate. One Council cruiser's navigation display froze mid-update. Another's targeting grid shifted just a fraction of a degree, enough to make precision impossible. And then came the boldest move of the operation. A modified launch vehicle built from salvaged components in a coastal hangar in Florida carried a small team into low orbit under the cover of the signal chaos. The craft was crude by Council standards, loud, hot, and inefficient. But it was fast enough to intercept the flagship's outer patrol route. Inside the cramped cabin, the team moved in silence. They weren't soldiers in the traditional sense. One was a space engineer, another a former astronaut. The rest volunteers trained in just the past few weeks. They wore mismatched suits, patched with fabric and plating from old prototypes. Using the data interference as cover, they approached a Council escort vessel on the flagship's flank. Small thrusters fired in short bursts, matching the ship's drift. A magnetic clamp latched onto the hull, and the team moved quickly, bypassing outer locks with tools no larger than a hand drill. In less than 8 minutes, they were inside. They didn't try to take the ship, only to reach its communications relay. There, they uploaded a single message into the fleet's encrypted channel. When the signal reached the flagship, Admiral Theron watched as his central display lit with words in flawless Council standard. "Your rules do not work here." The message repeated once, then the relay shut down, leaving the ship's crew scrambling to reboot. By the time security teams arrived, the intruders were gone, slipping away in their small craft, diving into Earth's atmosphere with a trail of burning plasma. The Council's losses that day were minimal in material terms. No ships destroyed, no major infrastructure lost. But something more dangerous had taken hold: doubt. The humans had boarded a ship in active formation, left their mark, and escaped. If they could do it once, they could do it again. From the flagship's observation deck, Theron looked down at the planet that had defied every expectation. The battle was no longer about overwhelming power. It was about who could keep control the longest, and for the first time he wasn't sure it would be the Council. For 3 days after Operation Glass Fang, the Council fleet remained in orbit, unmoving. To the untrained eye, it looked like discipline, a show of calm strength. But inside the command centers of the fleet, it was something else entirely: hesitation. Admiral Theron convened a closed meeting with his senior officers. The atmosphere was tense. Some spoke in clipped, efficient tones, others avoided eye contact entirely. The operation's failure wasn't catastrophic in a tactical sense. Ships were intact, weapon systems functional, but it had cracked something less tangible. "They entered one of our ships," said Commander Varric, voice tight. "They bypassed security, delivered a message, and escaped unharmed. If they can do this once, they can do it again. And if the rest of the galaxy believes it's possible..." No one finished the thought, but the meaning was clear. In the Council's history, its fleets had been symbols of absolute control. The illusion of invulnerability was as important as the firepower itself. Now, that illusion had been broken. Beyond Earth, The news had already spread. Despite the Council's efforts to contain it, fragments of the humans' boarding operation were circulating on the comm networks of distant worlds. The story grew with each telling: a daring raid, impossible odds, and a small craft slipping through the defenses of the mightiest fleet in the galaxy. On the mining colonies of the Calanth people, workers gathered in mess halls to hear the tale, some quietly wondering if their own grievances with the Council could be addressed in similar ways. On the trade stations of the Outer Belt, merchants spoke more openly, questioning whether the Council was still the unshakable authority it claimed. To be inside the Council itself, political fault lines began to widen. Representatives from smaller member worlds, long resentful of the heavy tribute demanded for mutual protection, began pushing for reassessment of the invasion. Some asked for troop withdrawals to protect their own sectors, citing growing instability. Others questioned the wisdom of committing so many resources to a single, stubborn planet when other regions were already restless. The pressure reached Theron's fleet through sudden changes in orders. Directives from high command became less aggressive, more defensive. Patrol routes were shifted away from high-risk areas. Logistics vessels were quietly redirected to supply worlds experiencing unrest. Earth noticed. In London, analysts at an intelligence coordination center began tracking Council fleet movements. They saw the pattern: fewer ships stationed over major cities, slower rotation of patrols, and reduced interference with human communications. The conclusion was obvious. The Council's attention was no longer fully on Earth. Human leaders moved quickly. Rather than striking harder, they chose a quieter approach: increase the unpredictability. Local resistance groups began targeting secondary objectives: sensor outposts, supply drops, and small orbital relays. Each attack was designed to be quick and messy, not devastating. The goal wasn't to cripple the fleet, it was to keep the invaders guessing. The results were immediate. Fleet captains reported increased operational fatigue among crews. Every small incident demanded investigation. Every anomaly had to be treated as a potential large-scale attack. The constant state of readiness drained morale. Ships began making small errors, missed patrol checkpoints, delayed responses, or misinterpreted orders. And then, without warning, the first formal withdrawal request came from a member state. The Torvex Alliance, which had voted strongly for Earth's integration, sent a statement to the Council Corps. "Our fleets are needed at home." It was a diplomatic way of saying, "This isn't our fight anymore." More requests followed. By the end of the month, Theron's fleet was operating at reduced strength. Ships that had once maintained a perfect grid over Earth now left visible gaps. These gaps did not go unnoticed by the people on the surface. In a broadcast that reached billions, a human news anchor summed it up simply: "They are leaving." On the flagship, Theron stared at the shrinking tactical display. Every departing vessel felt like a silent verdict, not against the humans, but against the Council's own leadership. He knew the politics well enough to see where this was going. If the Council withdrew fully, it wouldn't just lose Earth. It would lose the unquestioned authority it had held for centuries. But with unrest spreading across the galaxy, even he could not deny it. The war for Earth was no longer winnable. The Council fleet's final withdrawal began without ceremony. No grand speeches, no official announcement, just the slow, steady departure of ships into higher orbit, then into the darkness beyond. From Earth's surface, it looked almost anticlimactic. One evening, there were still clusters of Council, vessels visible in the night sky as pale, drifting points of light. By the following week, most were gone, leaving only a few observation craft that soon followed. Humanity had expected a decisive battle to end the conflict, a moment of dramatic triumph. Instead, the end came like a receding tide, silent but undeniable. In the command centers of major cities, leaders and analysts watched the radar feeds in disbelief. For months, they had prepared for the worst, rehearsing responses to orbital bombardments or large-scale ground assaults. Now those plans were sealed away, unused, yet no one celebrated immediately. There was suspicion, a lingering fear that this was only a feint. After all, the Council was powerful, and powerful empires rarely left without a reason. The confirmation came not from the Council itself, but from intercepted communications between its member worlds. The messages painted a clear picture. Unrest was spreading. Fleets were being recalled to deal with uprisings and political fractures. The resources needed to keep Earth under control no longer existed. It was, in the simplest terms, a strategic retreat. In a small studio in Geneva, an international media broadcast prepared to send Earth's first official statement to the galaxy. The team had debated for days over what tone to take: defiant, conciliatory, or silent. In the end, the decision was made to speak plainly. The camera light went red. A representative stepped forward, wearing no military uniform, just a dark suit. They spoke without notes, their voice steady. "This planet belongs to its people. We did not ask for this war, but we met it. We will not be ruled. Let this be known to all who listen. We seek peace, but we will not surrender our freedom." The message lasted less than a minute. It was translated into dozens of galactic languages and transmitted across every frequency the Council had once used to demand Earth's compliance. In the weeks that followed, the impact of those words rippled far beyond the solar system. On distant worlds, species long under Council authority replayed the broadcast, studying it not for its military implications, but for what it represented. A victory not of overwhelming strength, but of persistence and unpredictability. Merchants on the trade moon spoke of humans as the ones who made the fleet turn away. On mining colonies, quiet conversations began about what it might mean to resist. In the academic halls of neutral worlds, scholars started cataloging the strategies Earth had used, strategies that had turned the Council's advantages into vulnerabilities. Back on Earth, life returned slowly to something like normal. Satellites were restored to their original functions, cities repaired the damage from the early stages of the invasion, and industries adjusted to peacetime production. But there was also a quiet awareness that nothing was truly the same. Humanity had been seen, not as a minor species on the edge of known space, but as a force capable of holding its ground against the galaxy's most dominant power. In the Council chambers, the aftermath was bitter. Delegates accused each other of misjudgment, overreach, and negligence. Old alliances frayed, and for the first time in centuries, there were open discussions about reform, or even dissolution. The word Earth was spoken with a mixture of frustration and caution. On a clear night months later, a group of children in a coastal village lay on a rocky shoreline pointing at the stars. One asked if the ships would ever come back. "Maybe," said the oldest among them. "But if they do, they'll remember what happened last time." Far above, in the quiet reaches of space, the galaxy shifted in ways that would not be fully understood for generations. Some saw Earth's survival as the beginning of a new era of resistance. Others saw it as a dangerous precedent. But all agreed on one thing: the Council would never again see humanity as predictable. And perhaps that was victory enough.